I was wrong and you were right. Not about everything in life, but about certain aspects of my latest bike build where I was trying to bring this retro bike into the year 2024 with the use of a modern group set and modern components. Now, while I count this build as a success in general, there are areas that I've since gone back and changed, and there's also lots of different aspects that I think are important to discuss if you are considering taking on a project like this. So first and most important things to discuss, the handlebars. As you can see, the handlebars have been changed. We've now gone for a far more traditional separate handlebar and stem, which I have got to agree suits this bike far more than the modern one-piece chunky carbon handlebar and stem which I had on the bike. I feel slightly disappointed to have to admit defeat on that, but such is life. Whilst I was changing the handlebars, I've also changed the gearing on this bike, so now instead of that 40-54 big boy chainring setup, we've got a far more conservative 34-50, which means this bike is pretty much ready to take on, within reason, any kind of ride. So here is the finished article in its current guise, and just like how it was before, I've got to say, I'm really happy with it. I do agree that the new sort of handlebar and stem setup really does suit this bike, and that is the most important thing, is that it looks far more pleasing to the eye. How it rides? Well, I'm still yet to find out. But that does lead us on to some of the things I want to discuss now, and those are the aspects that you guys didn't get to see in episode 1 and episode 2 of the bike build series, because I think it's easy to assume that this bike went together with no dramas, no hiccups and no fuss. But I'd like to confirm that was absolutely not the case. You see, any bike build I've ever done always results in me having ordered the wrong part, ordered the wrong size part, or in this case, completely forgotten to order a part, or completely overlooked the fact that rim brake Shimano 12-speed Dura Ace is wired, not wireless. So rule number 1, never assume things are just going to work, because as the age-old saying goes, if you assume, you make an ass out of you and me. Now, while part of the fun of this project is overcoming the difficulty of mixing old and new, it is something that you really do need to be aware of, making sure that things will work and things are compatible. But as I say, that's kind of part of the fun of it, and also other elements that I think are important to do is to keep some aspects of the original bike. So in this instance, we've got the original bar end plugs, we've got the original bottle cage, we've got the original seat post, and unfortunately, the original bar tape had to go in the bin when I changed the handlebars over because I cut it too short. But I think that is a really nice way to carry a little bit of the ethos and history of the bike forwards when it's got the modern components fitted to it. So the main issues that I really had to overcome on this build were the headset and stem integration, and also the cable routing. Both were a little bit of a pain, and I kind of did allude to that a little bit in episode 2, but perhaps not quite as much as how it actually impacted the build. So let's talk about the headset first. Now, hopefully, as we all know by now, modern steer tubes and stems tend to use an 1.1/8 size. Now then, if we go back in time to eras like this bike, perhaps even older still, typically 1 inch was the size. So how have we gone about fixing that 1/8 of an inch gap? Well, simply with a small metal shim. This small shim has got a slot in the back of it to allow it to compress over the steer tube. It sits over the steer tube in between the stem. Then when you do the stem bolts up, because it's got a little slot in it, it allows it all to clamp up and close on and hold everything tight and secure. Not ideal, I completely agree with that, but I'm going to count it as more of a hack than a bodge, which in my eyes is certainly acceptable. Now, when it comes to the cable routing of this bike, was a bit of a pain, and it was also one of my biggest concerns before starting the project, and also one of my biggest frustrations during the process of building this bike. So I think we all need to actually take that into consideration, because in episode 1 and episode 2, I'm pretty sure we made it look like an absolute breeze. I'm really hoping to not have to take all these bits off, but would appear gonna have to. actually like relatively close to getting the thing out of here now, but my arms are getting dead. Now, I've had to drill a hole into the back of the frame to help route the cables internally, and whilst that did upset me, I'm kind of looking at this as a bike rather than a piece of a work of art, for example. So you've kind of got to suck that up and accept sometimes you're going to have to do things like that. Now, this bike is never going to stay built up in its current guise forevermore. It's going to get disassembled at some point and put back into its original condition. But if you are going to drill a hole into a metal frame, it's really important that any exposed metal is repainted or covered up with some sort of corrosion inhibitor. Otherwise, over time, it's gradually going to corrode and you're going to end up with blistered paint and a frame that is going to rot away, which we certainly want to avoid. And if you wanted to go the whole hog and do the same kind of process that big manufacturers would do, well, you would probably use a nice little rubber grommet as well, not only to keep dirt out from the inside of the frame, but also to stop any rough edges wearing away at your Di2 cable. No word of a lie, I did spend best part of 2 hours routing some of the Di2 cables through the handlebar and frame here. And I've got to be totally honest, it was a frustration, and I think most people at home probably would have struggled to do that without having the correct tools and time to get this done. Running the cable from the left shifter through the center of my one-piece handlebar and stem to the right-hand shifter was a pain. Running the cable from the left-hand shifter through the handlebar, all the way down through the down tube, through and around the bottom bracket junction, and then up the seat tube all the way to clip into the battery was a pain. And talking about the battery, I mean, that in itself was a frustration, a niggle, which I had to overcome with this bike build because of the mix of different standards and sizes. So the battery is housed inside the seat post, but I've had to do that by making the battery ever so slightly larger using sections of cut up latex inner tube. And then that is what's holding it wedged in place in the seat tube. And then also there's the fact of when I had to order the extra cable to run from the shifter all the way up to the battery, I ordered the longest one I could possibly get my hands on. But because this bike is massive as well, the cable was barely long enough to run all the way through the frame and clip into the battery. So if I ever have to undo and remove the seat post from this bike, unfortunately, the Di2 cable is going to come unplugged, falling down inside the seat tube, which I'm going to describe as suboptimal. So even though I've had to overcome some of these minor niggles when merging together retro and modern components, I am sat here happy that I've made the correct decisions and happy with the full outcome of this bike build. Apart from one thing, tubular tyres, which was one of the biggest compromises that I had to make when completing this bike build. Now, as I mentioned previously, both of the build videos were sponsored by Shimano, and it's thanks to their support that I was actually able to bring this project to life. Now, also, as I'm sure you can imagine, that also meant I was going to use Shimano wheels. But I had free choice of any Shimano wheel that I wanted to use. But the fact of the matter is, the latest 9200 rim brake wheels only come in a tubular tyre fitment. But I could have chosen any wheel from the Shimano range. And if I wanted to use a clincher tyre setup, which would have been easier to install and more suitable to everyday riding, I would have had to have chosen a lower spec wheel or a wheel which was from a previous group set, like the 9100 carbon wheels, which use an aluminium brake track and also would have allowed me to use a standard clincher tyre setup. But I decided that I wanted to prioritize having wheels that matched up with a group set rather than a tyre interface that was easier to live with. Because let's face it, I'm not going to be living with this bike, nor am I going to be riding it every single day. So in my eyes, I made the right decision. Try and prove me wrong in the comments section down below. So if we move away from discussing the specifics of this bike build, because I want to discuss bike builds in general. You see, throughout this project and all of the different bike builds I've done over the years, I've learned some really important things. Important enough that I think I really want to share them with you so that if you ever take on projects like this, you're armed with the important knowledge to help make your life a little bit easier. Number 1, projects like this will always cost more than you planned or expected. So be smart with your choices. Shop around, look online for bargains and discounts, or maybe even keep an eye out on places like eBay or Facebook Marketplace for used components that are in good condition. Number 2, conduct your research beforehand and decide what it is you're trying to achieve. Arguably, this was one of the biggest downfalls of my project because I initially set out trying to spec and build a bike that I was going to go bike racing on, and then slowly realized that wasn't what I wanted this project to be. And it was more about going out, riding the bike and enjoying the experience of it. So decide what you want to achieve and choose your components and parts accordingly. Otherwise, it's going to cost you more money and you're going to end up having to change stuff, much like I did. Now, every brand will have different levels of components to suit your needs, so just be sensible with your choices. Number 3, projects like this will take longer than you ever expected them to. This could be a good or bad thing, depending on your mindset. It could be great for a weekend project to just chip away at every now and again, but if you're going to try and approach it and get it done over one weekend, well, I think it's best to say, probably just don't do that. Something will go wrong, something will hold you up, and something will always catch you out that you hadn't anticipated for. Now, when I set about doing this project, I decided I want to split it into 2 videos. But in the end, because I had to order additional parts, I had to do that anyway, because there was a gap in the middle where I had to wait best part of 3 days for some additional parts to arrive. Number 4, now it pains me slightly to say this, because at some point you're going to have to compromise on a project like this. In this instance, I wanted to use a modern one-piece handlebar and stem, but it just didn't suit this bike. And the same could be said for the wheels. They were also a compromise, purely on the basis of what I actually wanted to use just doesn't exist. And number 5, ignore everybody else, because for projects like this, there's only one person that matters, and that's you. You need to make sure you're happy with the project, you're happy with the bike, and what you've ended up with makes you want to ride the bike more and more and more. And in that instance, everything can be considered a success. So those are my takeaway thoughts having completed a project like this, and hopefully it's helped you moving forwards if you decide to take the same kind of project on. Now, I know this might feel hard to believe, but as of yet, I still haven't actually been able to ride the bike, nor have I been able to glue the tubular tyres on yet, because there hasn't been a day when I've quite literally had nothing better to do. Anyway, nonetheless, I do hope you've enjoyed this video. If you have, please do give it a big thumbs up and do get involved in the comment section down below. Not only to let me know your thoughts on the new handlebar setup of the bike, but also to share your thoughts on the sort of subject of neo-retro builds. So hopefully we can all help the GCNTech community out. Right, give this video a thumbs up. If you haven't subscribed already, please do, because it helps support our channel. Right, I'm out of here. See you later.